Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel for the next installment in our ongoing Youth Figure Showcase series, where we take a look at a new release that I'm adding into my collection. And for today's episode, we will be looking at Lieutenant Torres from EXO-6 and their ongoing Star Trek Voyager line. So, this figure is also special because, at least for me, it closes up the Voyager command crew. They still have to release Neelix, who they've shown a few times, but I wasn't a big fan of his character, so that's one I'll be passing on. So B'Elanna is the last of the command crew I'll be adding in. EXO-6 has teased some aliens, including Species 8472, so I am very excited for that, but my guess is that there's going to be some time before we actually get that even announced for pre-order with everything they've been issuing. Now, before getting into the figure, I do want to talk a little EXO-6 and give you some insight into kind of my mindset when I'm reviewing these. And it's definitely something that has evolved over time. But the first thing I had to realize when looking at an EXO-6 product was these aren't Hot Toys figures and they aren't damn toys. So I did have to dial down my expectations a little bit. And at least in the US, the cost of these is actually less than Hot Toys by a significant margin, with the exception of maybe Krug right now. So that old adage, you get what you pay for, definitely holds true. And I was guilty of that earlier on, kind of comparing the sculpts, in particular that Janeway, to Hot Toys versions or other amazing releases. And of course you can't help but be disappointed when you see how much of a swing there is between each company. And I'm not saying Hot Toys is perfect by any means, but they have established a benchmark that we tend to judge things against. So the point is, when I review an EXO-6 figure, I realistically have to review against other EXO-6 releases. And I personally had to make a decision. Do I want to continue buying these figures, even with sculpts that aren't always the best? Or do I pull my resources? And ultimately, I made the choice to continue on with the lines because I am a big Trek fan. And I doubt very much we'll ever see some of these characters in 6-scale format ever again, given that the license is really appealing to a very small fan base. This isn't Star Wars or Marvel, so that also comes into play. And look, sometimes EXO-6 does impress. Locutus, for example, Cisco, Saru, you do get some amazing pieces. But there's no denying that the sculpts aren't always there. And when you look at these, and if you see any of my other EXO-6 reviews, particularly when it comes to a specific crew, you're going to see a lot of the same issues come up. The uniforms are basically the same, just different sizes and different colors, and even the accessories are for the most part reused time and time again. So the clear distinctive characteristic here is a sculpt. Everything else is always really solid, so the sculpt is what makes or breaks these. So let's take a look at B'Elanna. And I will start with an overview of everything that's being included here. And needless to say, if you've seen any of the other standard crew releases, like Chakotay, like Harry Kim, or Tom Paris, this isn't very different. So you're getting some interchangeable hands, and then the standard set of accessories. The phaser with holster, the pad, and the tricorder with the holster. And that's pretty much it, other than the stand with the transporter pad. So very much they're more bare bones releases. My only question here, we really couldn't get an engineering pack or even an engineering smock. Not essential by any means, but again, just seems like a missed opportunity. Although maybe the molding on those would be cost prohibitive, but just feels like there could have been something else provided. Now let's jump into the accessories in more depth, and we'll start with the hands. And I will say, EXO-6 does a good job with the spare and alternate hands. Paint apps are always really solid and in scale, which if you saw my Fishbone Agent Smith review, scale can actually be a big problem. And that's honestly something we don't often think about and maybe take for granted. But it's an important thing for things to scale properly. So decent job on these, and always a plus that you have hands designed for specific uses and accessories. Now for the rest of the piece, I'm going to group them together so we have seen them before. And first up, you have the hand phaser with the magnetic holster. It works, right? Nothing fancy, but decent paint apps, and I love the magnetic connection to the jumpsuit. And that's followed by the tricorder, which also opens and closes with magnets holding everything together. That has always been and remains a nice feature on this accessory. And there is some nice detail work here, even though a portion of this is basically just a sticker. And finally, you get the pad. Again, nothing fancy, just a flat plastic recreation with a sticker on the face. And I will give EXO-6 some credit for switching things up a little bit and giving us a slightly different image on the front. With the Voyager crew, we've seen Borg cubes, we've seen the Delta Flyer specs, so now we're getting something a little bit different. So nice to have some slight variations there. Okay, so now the moment of truth. Let's look at the sculpt. So where to start? Let's go positive first. I like that they are improving the paint apps and work on the eyes. The earlier figures, particularly Janeway, had that very old school looking paint on the eyes that looked very dollish. And modern day 6-scale figures really focus on those, helping to make the figure seem more realistic. So I do think EXO-6 has improved there. Also, there was some mention on Facebook groups that her eyes were coming out crossed. I'm staring really intently here, and I think that they're right. It's not a huge issue, like it's not that noticeable, but there is an issue with the eyes. And it's disappointing given that it's something that happened before with Tuvok, with Chakotay, and now with her. Although, like I said, you do have to look very closely to see that on B'Elanna, which at least is a plus, as it's not something you're immediately going to gravitate to. As for likeness, it's okay. I think for EXO-6 it's decent. Not their best, but not their worst. The cranial ridges look good. And actually looking at her, I think it's a good likeness, but the eyes might just be throwing things off a little bit. So maybe if those were reworked a little bit, she'd be perfectly on point. Now the hair. It's sculpted, and paint-wise, there are some actual good paint apps here, giving her hair almost a shimmer of sorts. So I like that, but it just feels like a blob of plastic dropped on top. It looks okay, but the biggest culprit is essentially the joint with the hair and the sculpt. There's no blending in and no care kind of taken. It's just a piece that they dropped on, and that's it. Again, from my opening, I'm going to judge against other EXO-6 products, so it's on par, and I was expecting this given past experiences. Now, the rest of the figure is great. There's a ton of posability here, benefiting from double-jointed elbows and the like, and given that these figures wear full uniforms, that's nice to get and understand that any unsightly joints would just be hidden away. The uniform itself is, as always, a highlight, and something that I feel like EXO-6 does deliver on. Their material choices and the cut and fit on the figure is always really good, so no complaints at all about these, and the comm badge and provisional lieutenant rank on the collar are really well done. And I always like that they aren't screen printed, but are actual pieces of plastic that are affixed to the uniform and the undershirt. Shoes are pretty standard, nothing really crazy to discuss as they're just plain black boots, but overall the figure feels very solid, which is nice, and B'Elanna doesn't require the stand to stay upright, so great body that's being used here for the figure. So look, only other issue worth discussing, pegs for the hands. I have had previous breaks here and have had to come up with fixes, and the B'Elanna pegs don't feel like the sturdiest. They just don't, unfortunately. And even when trying to socket these back into the wrist peg, I noticed that the clip tends to get caught in the plastic around the socket, and if you're not careful, it can snag and bend. So just feel like EXO-6 could improve that, or at the very least provide some extra pegs. And that's not just an EXO-6 problem. 3-0 also does the same thing with the Stranger Things kids, and I'm not sure why they don't just throw in an extra set of pegs in case something happens. Also, last nitpick here, they are the wrong skin tone, although fortunately they're hidden mostly by the uniform. But look, overall solid release from EXO-6. Again, not going to compare to other companies because honestly it wouldn't be fair. I think if you're like me and picking up EXO-6, it's because you have a connection to Star Trek in one way or another. These figures honestly aren't ones that I see a lot of people picking up on a whim. Maybe the Wrath of Khan ones would be a little different, but if you're on a budget trying to pick your next figure, I can't unfortunately imagine that seeing B'Elanna Torres is going to make you buy her over something other companies are offering. Like we as Star Trek fans might say, 100% I'm picking B'Elanna up, but I think most people would gravitate towards something with a little more pop. I am looking forward to seeing what EXO-6 has in store with the Strange New World line, Picard line, and the TNG line. For some reason, it feels like those figures are getting a better treatment. I don't know that Voyager got the treatment I'm seeing to just get them out of the door, but it does feel like at times Voyager was a bit of an afterthought. I do think she's going to impress me more as part of the crew, though, more than as a standalone, because there isn't just that much excitement to the figure. But as a crew, I think that's going to change, and this is another case of the figures being much better in aggregate. So look, I wish I could be more excited about this one. I did like her character in the show, and that's a big reason why I picked the figure up. And as a big Voyager fan, having a representation of the crew was key for me. So I'm happy in that sense, but I'm not going to reasonably sit here and tell you that this is the best figure out there. And I honestly would say, unless you are a big fan of Voyager or B'Elanna Torres, I think this should probably be a pass. We're in what feels like a golden age of 6-scale figure collecting, and these things aren't cheap. So if you want a show-stopping piece, there are definitely other options that are going to impress and just captivate you from a display perspective. So that was a quick look at Lieutenant B'Elanna Torres, Chief Engineer of the Starship Voyager. I wish I could be more excited, but it is what it is. Okay release, but nothing that overly impressed, and I do wish EXO-6 had given her even one alternate accessory. Maybe it comes down to this line being a much smaller demand one, so if that's the case, then so be it. But I feel like other third-party companies give you some slightly different accessories, so I'm hard-pressed to think that adding an engineering pack at least would have been a deal breaker. So let me know your thoughts on this one, and sorry if this came across harsh, and if you think I'm wrong, please feel free to let me know. But in any case, thanks for watching as always, and if you do find yourself enjoying some of the content, please consider dropping a like or a comment, and if you haven't done so, also consider subscribing. And we'll touch base on the next video.